As already mentioned by Chris, today I will talk about security testing, continuous security testing. So I will tackle this very often black box, which is called security testing. As an engineer, I always try to search for new solutions, and security actually is not really new, but it becomes more and more important. Yeah, just consider, yeah, we are. I mean, I don't know. Some years ago, we released once a quarter or once a month or whatever. Today, we frequently release, and yeah, several times per day. At least very mature companies, and therefore you need to have very, very good security testing approaches. I mean, if you check the newspaper or the news, you regularly hear some security issues where a company get a security bucket exploited and used. Recently, if I guess everyone knew this Log4j issue, and of course you don't want to have that. Yeah, you don't want to have this bad reputation on the market. You don't want to lose tons of data, and of course you don't want to have this damage to your company, what is, by the way, not even countable. Just if you look at Meta and so on, if they have such security leaks, which they had several years ago. And today, I will talk about SAST, DAST, IAST, RASP. Yeah, I will mention that what this is. Putting a DevSecOps teams on steroids, four fists and hallelujah. Here I used also a picture from a famous movie, at least here in Austria, Germany region. If you don't know them, no problem. Those two guys have weapons, and their weapons are their fists. They are very strong, and believe me, my fists here in the security area will be for sure as strong as those are from them. Before I dig into the topic, please let me also introduce myself a little bit. So, who am I? I'm Matthias Zax. I am from Austria, yeah, so living there in the capital city, Vienna. And yeah, originally I'm a developer, and I shifted my mindset, or I upgraded myself, how I would say it, in the area of test automation about 3 years ago or something like this. So that you also know here in the background. Currently, I am working as an agile engineering coach in the Raiffeisen Bank International. So, what is an agile engineering coach doing? It's nothing related to Scrum or Kanban or any agile practices. It's more about, with this whole agile transformation, engineering practices changed. And what I'm doing is training and coaching teams to get better there. For example, security testing, or personally, I'm more focused on test automation. So also what Andrew showed before, I really enjoyed the talk, especially coming from the technical part. Yeah, I like to share what also in RBI. I'm also the organizer at the community of practice there, so which is a strong internal community where we foster test automation topics. Up to now, we haven't published any open source frameworks, but maybe in the future. I like to speak on conferences, meetups, so I want to share, I want to contribute to the community, that I share what we are doing and that they can benefit out of that. Also to some magazines, so IT magazines mostly, of course. And if you want to get in contact with me, please use this contact data, preferable on LinkedIn. That's to me, but now come to this topic, security testing. So to the agenda. First, I will show you something about the motivation, why I went into this topic. Then I will explain you what is security testing, what is or how I would explain it. Then I will explain the hallelujah, and at the end I will show you 10 steps to success, how you can put your team on steroids with security testing. Motivation, what motivated me to go into this topic, and I also want to show you then some numbers which I found during my research. So let me give you some bullet points. Security testing, it was always something for me which was not, it was kind of a black box for me. Yeah, it was not tangible. I know it was important. I know it's here and we have to do it. We have to do this pen test, but always security was something which was very expensive, and it was always outsourced, and there was a company and we had to plan it a long time before in advance, and then they did something, we got the report, and that was the security testing for me, at least how I understood it. And at the end, security really slowed down the release cycle time. Release cycle time, yeah, so from the time where we kind of finished or where we committed our code to the time where the value was at the customer. So where it was deployed, so the customer was able to use it. And security, yeah, just if you consider if things are outsourced, it was really slowing this down. And as a developer, as a test automation engineer, as a automation practitioner, I want to automate things, yeah, and there must be a solution. I cannot accept it that I have wait for weeks until my software is deployable. And so I went into this topic, yeah, and I found some numbers, and they are quite interesting. So there were two companies doing research on security testing. There were companies were PurpleSec and SonicWall, and they published some numbers. And the first one is quite huge. It's about 90%. Yeah. And here we talk about 90% of all security incidents, yeah, are due to attackers exploiting known software bugs. Yeah, so because maybe companies use outdated software libraries, for example, very old Java library or old web server or whatever, and the hackers, or however you want to call them, exploited those known software bugs, and that's 90%. That's crazy. Or we could avoid that by going for security testing, and of course then also fixing the findings. The next number, 40%, and this is now a year-to-year comparison value from 2020 to 2021, we had a plus 40%, yeah, of all to the malware attacks. Yeah? And this curve is going very, very high. Yeah? I'm quite sure this year we will have much more than 40%. So this means, and this is also because, computing power gets much, much, much more faster and cheaper. And hackers can use them and can attack systems very easily. And also, it's quite easy because nowadays, with Dockerization and with everything, it's quite easy that you attacking a system. Yeah, you just download the Docker, and yeah, I don't want to explain that one. And the next number, this is also about 2020. It was 20 billion, and that was what their estimation was about. So approximately, of course, was the damage due to ransomware. Yeah, and of course, I don't want to contribute to this value, or I don't want that my company contributes to this value, because that's already very high. And so we need to do something, especially with the first number. I don't want to that someone can exploit my system because I have a known software bug. Yeah. So, but what is this security testing? What is continuous security testing? Yeah, if we would sit now in person, I could ask you, and I'm quite sure if I ask 10 people, I will get kind of 11 different answers, because there are quite a lot of interpretations about that, surrounding, and only a few people really go into the details and understand what security testing is. So let me give you my interpretation or my definition of security testing. That's quite an easy one. So security testing is, during security testing, vulnerabilities are discovered and attempts are made to exploit them. So that's quite straightforward. And also, if you know that, I guess you can also test like this against your system. And I distinguish it into three different types. The first type is the vulnerability assessment. So here you check your system, you scan it and analyze it. If you have some outdated software libraries, for example, for example, you use Java 1.8 or you use Log4j 1. Something something, So this is that one. The next is penetration testing. I guess most of you know what penetration testing is. So here the system will be analyzed and detected by this simulated malicious users. So the so-called pen testers, and they try to get access to it. For example, you have some website and you have cross-app scripting enabled, or any other techniques where you most probably can bypass a login or whatever. So this is penetration testing. And the next is compliance testing. Those are also known as conformity tests or regulatory tests. So, for example, I work for a banking environment, and of course, here are a lot of regulatories around or certifications. And for example, if you want to be PCI compliant, you need to test. Yeah, they show you then some testing techniques, or also get external tested, of course. And this is also one area or one type of security testing. The next is, so we have these three areas, and now I want to show two groups because this is important. The first is these functional security tests. So for example, you have a login feature, yeah, and you want to test that the user management or the access right management is using as designed. Yeah, so if you log in, that you have only the rights which are really supposed to be as this user. Because also security testing is important if you get into the system, that you only see the data which is related to you. Yeah, not, for example, as a bank, I'm not allowed to see all the data. So also, if you're already in, you have to test here. And these tests can be, as I mentioned, login, logout, password policies, credential management, and so on. Yeah? So as an understanding. And the other group is non-functional tests. I guess those are quite properly known. Here is OWASP, quite yeah, famous. So this is the Open Web Application Security Project. It's an, as I mentioned, open source community, and they are defining security risks and also what findings are outside, and you can regularly check there and use them. It's very, very powerful. And so for example, you could test a login feature with SQL injections. Yeah, this is quite probably what you most probably don't want to have, that someone is dropping a database through your email field or username field. And yeah, and also the compliance checks are in this group of non-functional security tests. So we have the three types and these two groups, and how we can get rid of these. Yeah, what we can do that we tested, that we can see if we have to go for more security testing and how we can go for that. And the answer is quite obvious. These are these four fists. Yeah. So SAST, DAST, IAST, and RASP. But what are those? And the first fist, SAST. So static application security testing. SAST is a white box testing approach. And so this means white box testing. So you need the source code, the bytecode, binary files, and so on. And you testing if you have there some security issues. So these vulnerabilities are found very early in the SDLC, so the software development lifecycle. And this is also kind of shift left, yeah. So very early that you get these findings and you can fix it already in the development phase. So quite cheap then to fix them. There's kind of a drawback, so you cannot discover any runtime and environmental issues, but that's fine. The advantage is it's very, very fast, yeah, because scanning source code is much faster than having a running application and doing and checking there. But here we have another fist, which you will hear in a second. Tools are, I will not go into details here, but that you just heard them, SonarQube, TeamScale, also from OWASP, we have the dependency check tool, which are open source. TeamScale is a commercial software. So this is SAST, white box testing approach. The next is DAST, dynamic application security testing. We had right now white box, now we have black box testing. So this is testing where you need your application running. Yes, you need an environment, you need your application deployed there, and it needs to be running, so system under test. And here you can find vulnerabilities a little bit later in the SDLC, but still early. Yeah, in your dev environment, you can already test first things, but always consider most probably you have another environmental setup in your dev environment than in your production environment. Just that you consider that. And here are techniques used to do some fault injection techniques. For example, that you do SQL injections or JavaScript injections. If your system is secure here or not. Yeah? Tools are here, for example, Overstep, Pursuit, or Gauntlet. And of course, I'm an engineer, so I have to show a little bit of tools or source code. And I want to show you here is Overstep, because I want to make it a little bit more tangible, especially if you're completely new into this area. Overstep, is I mentioned, is from this open source community. It's a tool, so it's open source. They also support a Docker container, so you can download the Docker, you can run it very, very easy. You can just insert here your URL. This is your application, and you run, for example, you don't configure anything else. You use the standard profile, everything else, and it will kind of attack your system, and afterwards you get all the output. Yeah, of course you need then to classify, and because at the beginning you will get really a lot, most probably, yeah, depending of course. And then you get first insights. What are your security findings just from Overstep? That's everything. Yeah, you can also integrate it, of course, in your pipeline. You don't need to use any UI. Yeah, everything can also run through command line. And then you have already implemented first security testing, continuous security testing. So quite easy. Or going back to the FIST. So we had SAST DAST. The next is IAST, interactive application security testing. And IAST is quite cool because it combines the benefits of SAST and DAST. Yeah, it's kind of a combination of those both. And the biggest advantage is here that you have here less false positive. As I mentioned also before, if you do the dust checking, sometimes it happens that they have a false positive, so you have a finding, but it's not true, yeah, because it's on this environment we don't have it, or it was just a wrong finding. And IAST is much better here. So IAST addresses the shortcomings from SAST and DAST and combines both approaches. Yeah, for the IAS tools, you use the knowledge of the application flow, data flow, to create advanced attack scenarios to use the results of the dynamic analysis. And yeah, as I mentioned, it reduces these false positive alarms or these false alarms, which is quite good. So you don't have to investigate to each finding, what you have to do on other techniques a little bit more. A drawback is, or a thing to do, you have or you need to install an agent. Yeah, it does not come out of the box. Something needs to be installed on the environment or attached to the application, which triggers and stores all the data which needs to be analyzed. And so it controls the runtime and data flow information. It also includes configuration information, also all the HTTP requests, responses which are happening, and also the libraries and frameworks which are used. And with that, you get a much better output. So during a dynamic scan, the tool learns based on the interaction to test cases, information about the application. So the tool uses this knowledge to create additional test cases also at the end. What I mentioned before, it's also, I mean, you have your application, for example, your login, but you also want to get into the login and then scan your application more. Yeah? And then you get also more test cases. So for example, if you go to the login and then if you navigate to, I don't know, customer button, which customers are appeared there and so on, can I do their SQL injection? Because sometimes also, also an employee of a company is a potential security risk if you, yeah, take it precisely. A tool here, for example, what I want to mention is the Contrast Community Edition, which is also open source. So this is IAST, a combination of SAST and DAST. So it combines black box and white box. And one is missing, which is also security testing. This is RASP. It's Runtime Application Security Protection. And this is rather, or not so much a security testing approach, it's more monitoring approach, but still it's very important because you want to know what is happening on your application and you want to see a potential attack. And here we use RASP as a technique. So RASP works inside an environment, yeah, and it's, as I mentioned, less a testing tool, it's more a security tool or protection tool. It gets plugged into your application, and it controls all your application flows and also the requests which are coming from which IP address and so on. And it screens those continuously. Yeah, so it checks what is happening, and if something is malicious or seems not as designed, it can fire an alert, or it can even go that far that it terminates the session. For example, it blocks the IP address. So it closes the terminate session, it blocks the IP address, and you are fine for some time. Yeah, which is very, very important. Tools are, for example, here also from Overstep, the App Sensor, and also the Contrast Community Edition serves here a RASP testing approach. Let me summarize the four fists, yeah, that we can, then I can show you how we use it. So SAST, it checks your code and dependencies. DAST, it checks your environment and the application, yeah, so black box, SAST, white box. IAST, it runs with your application and combines SAST and DAST. And RASP, it runs in the production, yeah, or on your environment and verifies if you get attacked. So those are the four fists. And of course the hallelujah. So we want to use them. Yeah. But before I show you how we use them or how we recommend to use them, I want to mention one very, very important thing. It's a little bit off topic, and in general I don't do that, but it's really important. The most important competence, yeah, about security testing is really the culture. Yeah? It's about the people that they are trained, that they don't leave your net leave your netbook unlocked if you're working in the cafeteria or something like this. This is very, very important. Yeah. So each of the roles in your team needs to be aware of security and do security testing. That's very important, and this was the reason I want to emphasize on that also here. And now I want to come back to kind of a little bit more technical, to the four fists and the pipeline. Yeah, this is kind of this hallelujah. So how can a secure pipeline look like? Huh? So if I'm made raw now as a pipeline, so most of you know that one. Ooh, sorry, that was a misclick. So we have the secure design. Yeah? So it's the first phase, coding, secure design phase, then secure coding, then continuous integration and deployment. Then we have the testing and production, or let's call it runtime defense. And this is the secure CI/CD pipeline. Easier. There is some white box, so there comes a little bit more. We have here on all these phases triggers, and to all these triggers we have activities. In the secure design phase, yeah, so we're defining your user stories, yeah, where you sit together and do story refinement. You can do already here security testing. So what you can do threat modeling. Yeah, so you draw your feature, use you show where is a potential security risk. Yeah, so where your API calls are going, where is an external system, where you need to test most probably something. And here you can define already functional security tests. Yeah, that's very important. Already in that phase, you have your user story and you test, that's the login, and I want to test if there is an SQL injection possible. Test case is designed, and if it comes to the development, you will test it, or you will even write a test automation case for that. Very important that you define security tests, functional or also maybe non-functional security tests. So this is in the design phase. Then we come to the coding, and here the triggers are, of course, the coding itself, yeah, but also code review. Yeah, that you do the peering session, someone checks the code and looks with a critical eye on security issues or on the security findings. And of course, continuously. Why continuously? Because here comes the first fist into the game, and this is SAST. I mean, it's coding, white box testing approach. Here we have SAST. So the source code gets checked if we use some, for example, if you have your Gradle dependencies, if you use an outdated library and so on, or if you do a coding which is not security safe, it will already have here the findings. And of course, you want to fix them early, so you use IDE plugins, for example. You also can use SCA, would be maybe another fist. So SCA is a software composition analysis. So here you check all your dependencies. So for example, if you use JavaScript, as we heard before, and use npm, if you add a framework which you use, you have the feeling you download the whole internet. So you use a lot of dependencies because they're dependent of each other, and it will check all of these dependency trees if there are some security findings. That's SCA, just that you know that. Very briefly explained. The next phase, so we have coding, that's already secure, but then we build it, yeah. And so we have a package, so we have everything attached, and of course we want to deploy it. So and all those are triggers for a potential security issue. And here we come with the next fist into the game. Of course, we have again SAST, because we have our artifact and those binaries we can check again. Yeah? Can happen that we have additional findings. And we have here DAST. So we have our package, we deploy it, we run it on the dev environment or the integration environment, and we can do already our first Overstep test, and we get first feedback. How does our application look like? And the most important stuff is what did change. Yeah. So of course, I don't want to implement any security issues. So here we have dust. Then we come to the testing phase. Of course, testing is an ongoing continuous activity through all phases, but here we talk about manual testing and the real testing activities. Here we come with the next one, and this is IAST. Yeah? So of course we have here also DAST, especially if you're thinking about we go to the user acceptance environment. So if where manual testing is happening, we can check before also DAST because you can automate that, the fast feedback, and IAST. Yeah, so you install your agent, you do your manual tests, or you do also your test automation tests with the IAST, and you get then this much better output from the IAST agent, from your IAST software. You can also execute here, and you should execute your function security test, which you have defined in the design phase. And you can here do already penetration testing. Yeah, so from Overstep, that's not much more than also doing penetration tests. That you most probably, if you need this sign from the external company for the penetration tests, but maybe if you do all these things already internally, they maybe approve it just immediately. Yeah, or you will get much less findings from them, which is also awesome. And the last phase, obvious, I guess everyone knows it now. The trigger is kind of continuously. And what I want to have here is RASP. So I want to add here my monitor if I get attacked, and I want to have my graphs. I want to see what's ongoing, and also I want to destroy or terminate the one or the other session. Maybe at least I want to get an alert if something's happening, especially in the beginning. So this is the secure kind of this hallelujah, how you as a team, yeah, hopefully everyone has already a pipeline, and how you extend it. And now what I want to do as a ending, I want to give you 10 steps, what is kind of my prioritization I would recommend to do to get to this pipeline. The 10 steps to the hallelujah, the 10 steps to this continuous security testing approach to the secure pipeline. First is kind of team up. Yeah, I mentioned the culture aspect. So join forces if the security department. If you're an enterprise company, you for sure have a security department. If it requires more than upskill someone in your team to security testing. Yeah. Also, if you, join forces and in your team care about that, you have security skills. Yeah. Very often this is not done. And then is this security testing is very often this black box, and this should not be. Yeah. Security testing is not that difficult. The next is then train your team in threat modeling. It's a very shift left approach. Yeah? So you draw on feature-based application page where threats can happen, and or where potential security risk is, and where I want to test. That's very transparent that the team is aware where we will test what. Introduce also misuse cases. Very often what I also see is that teams are really very good in defining test cases, this happy path, yeah, login successful, and maybe also login not successful with the error message text. They do the assertion there, but also introduce misuse cases that someone will hack your system. For example, you do a SQL injection test case, yeah, and you execute them. You write a test for that. So, and this could, of course, depending on the feature, the misuse case can be different. That you have them. And let's go. Yeah. Set up Dust, inclusive the IDE plugins if they are available from the tool you choose, that you get the feedback very, very fast, especially from the SAST check, because that's quite an easy one. The next is that you go for DAST and add it as earliest as possible to your pipeline, that you get the output. Especially, I guess every one of us here has a running application of your product. We don't do it from scratch every day. That's happening very rarely. So you add SAST, you add DAST, and then you get the first outcome. You get the first matrix, and I would not go for any KPIs where you want to go for it. For example, 0 major findings and 10 findings or whatever. I would say, okay, of course, maybe 0 major findings would be, or 0 critical findings, maybe it's a good approach. But then you say a positive trend, so that you don't add any security issues with each release. So that you really say, okay, from now on we have 355 findings without classifications now, and you won't get worse. Maybe you also can say you only won't get better. It would be even better. The next, if you're at that stage already, then you go for IAST agent. So you install that one on your user acceptance test environment or on the testing environment, wherever you want it, and get the findings out of that. As I mentioned, combination of SAST and DAST. Then you automate low-hanging fruit. This step is already quite late, as you mentioned, or as I see, but very often the automation happens later on. If you can afford it earlier, good. If not, here you should do it latest, that you automate low-hanging fruits for functional security tests, also non-functional security tests, if you have defined them, of course. And at the last step, I would recommend that you go for RASP, that you get more transparency from your production environments, what's ongoing there, especially with this security eye. Good. That was it. Thank you very much for your attention. Hopefully, I could explain you this whole security testing a little bit more. Also, what continuous security testing is, what these 4 security testing approaches are, which I showed you, my 4 fists. Of course, there are much more outside, but those what I have chosen. And at least for us, it brought us much more insight from the application about security. And yeah, our products are much secure now. I mean, they always were, but now we can deploy it very fast. Good. Thank you very much for your attention. Now I'm open for questions, if there are one. I can see some. You mentioned SAST is best for shift left approach in testing. Would you say shift left makes more sense for UI API testing? I mean, I would not restrict it to UI API testing. I mean, of course, there most probably the highest security risk is happening, because those things, especially if you have an open API, so an API which is usable from outside, and the UI, I mean, that one, especially if you're have it published to the world of the internet, or also to your user group, this is how your application can be attacked. But I mean, if you go for SAST, so if you go for a white box testing approach, that your sources get scanned and your dependencies get scanned, I would not restrict it to UI and API testing. If you have a product for, I don't know, databases, or where a lot of transportation, so ETL jobs, so you have a data source and you export it to another data source. Of course, you also want that there is, I don't know, to the port FTP port 22 happening something, putting a file there with some weird scripts, and your database get dropped on the other end or something. So I wouldn't restrict it, but from a risk perspective, of course, UI and API testing or applications have the highest or higher risk. That's would be my answer to that question. Good.
You have, I don't know if you have more questions. I can't see them on my end, but do you have, a lot of people, when they go to something like this, is a concept that they're new to or don't have a lot of experience with, they tend to go to tools. Is there a certain group of tools or open source tools that you use? I did see mentions to OWASP. Obviously, that's the industry standard. But what else? Yeah, well, there you go. Somebody asked the same question. What else can you use for that type of thing?
Good. I guess the question was now the previous one was about IAST. Okay, yeah, that one. What
Yes.
tool can be used? I mean, I mentioned the Contours Community Edition. To be honest, we didn't went for that because we were quite satisfied with the SAST checking and DAST checking. So we didn't went for the IAST agent. But I would recommend that one because I really like open source solutions, and if you need an agent or something needs to be installed, and in general the security area, a lot of companies are selling their products, which is quite okay, of course, but it makes it more difficult to do the evaluation, yeah, for that. So of course you can get these trials and so on, but for open source it's quite easy. So I would recommend that you, for IAST, I would only go for that one if you have already implemented SAST and DAST, because that's quite easy to go for. For SAST, you can go for SonarCube. For example, please, these are no recommendations. It's just what we used. You get into your findings very fast. I also was surprised, how much findings we had. Doesn't mean that all of those needs to be fixed immediately. Yeah, especially the minor ones, but the critical ones you should, and in general you don't have so much critical findings. And also for dust, I mean, it was quite easy to do kind of very fast penetration testing with Overstep. As I mentioned, it is open source. I can recommend those. I can recommend, by the way, all tools from Oversp. Also to check out their website. So if you Google Oversp, you will find their website, and they also show you the top 10 security risk and so on. It's a very, very good source. If you have a web application, and I guess most of the applications nowadays are web related, that you see what's ongoing there. Yeah, so that's quite good to check it out there once a month or something like this, to go on their website and check the latest things which are ongoing, and also maybe that you go to the tools sector and check what tools they are offering.
I think that's a really good bit of advice, just in general, when you're doing research on what's available, when you need to cover a certain part of the application with testing, even outside of security, right? Is constantly being aware of what's in the marketplace and just being aware of what's out there. A lot of times you try something and you think you can't do it, and then a year later, somebody solved it, and then you can go find a tool to do that, whether it's paid or open source, right? So I think that's a really good point. The second question was, what do you feel makes a DAST tool effective? What do you look for in a DAST tool that's good?
I mean, in the dust tool, it verifies, or it checks what is what is possible against your application. Yeah, so that's your URL input, so HTTP, and then your application. What is possible without having any credentials? Yeah, so maybe I can get into the system. It tries really a lot of different attacks. You can, depending on the tool, of course. And this is very important, yeah, because those attacks are very easy to do by hackers. Yeah, so you, if there is a non, you can get, for example, which application server is in use, which PHP version do you use. This is, if you don't restrict that, those information is available from the website, of course, with some tools or with some specific cores. And if the hacker gets this information already, so if you use, for example, I don't know, PHP 5, yeah, because just by accident I know that from a friend of mine, which has a friend, but not in our company, of course, no serious. And so if the hacker gets this information, of course, he can then Google, yeah, what are known software bugs on PHP 5.2, yeah, using Apache, I don't know, 2.2. And if it's really easy, maybe he also finds a Docker image where you already can use this software bugs and exploit them and use them. And that's very easy. I mean, or doing if your application behaves weird after, if you get a brute force attack, that of course you also want to don't have, yeah, so that you, I don't know, your time responses go dramatically up if you get, I don't know, 100 or 1000 cores in a second, which is not so much, to be honest, depending of the application. And this makes Dust very effective because it checks your environment, it checks your application which is running, and at the end, this is the application which your user is using, and this is also your application which gets attractive for or one or the other person which should not use your application. Yeah, so hopefully you know what I mean. And
Yeah, I do. I do.
yeah,
As a test professional, if I was going to think of how would I get into an application, right? Like looking at the different versions of the tech stack that are in use. If you know as a hacker that there are certain versions that have certain vulnerabilities, you're going to target those first, right? So I think that was a really good point that you brought up. You're looking at how to narrow any testing, right? Even if you're a hacker, you're testing, right? You're trying to eliminate all the different permutations and narrow down your test scope. So a hacker wants to do the same thing. They're no different. How do I find that? Well, how do I find known vulnerabilities? I go look for the versions, and then I can start to target my attacks based on what those vulnerabilities expose. So I think that was a really good
Absolutely
point.
correct. Absolutely correct. And I mean, I guess everyone knew that. I mean, we are all working in the testing area, test automation area, or software area, and the Log4j issue which happened. I mean, that was crazy how fast hackers used that. Yeah, the bug got published, and it was, I don't know, 1 hour later you already could download the GitHub repository
Yeah,
and view things. I
we're
mean,
watching those bugs to protect our applications, but they're watching those bugs the same. It would probably with even more attention, right? We're busy building, so we're busy paying attention to features. They're busy hacking, so they're paying attention to exploits. So
yes,
it's
I
a
mean,
different set of tools, and I think that's bringing these type of tools that you talked about today to the fore, so that people are aware of them and that they maybe might take these back to their companies and advocate for this type of testing is huge, because security is still very much an afterthought in a lot of companies.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I don't know why. I mean, I know also for me, security was not the highest attractive thing I wanted to go into, to be honest. Yeah, my motivation come really because I really want to automate things. I don't want to do this again and again, and I really didn't understand why we have to do after each major release or after breaking change this external pen test. I was like, why? I mean, we did it once, so why we don't automate it and send the report
Exactly.
to the external vendor? And I mean, we did it already, or we don't, or that we do. I don't know. We have it integrated already in our cycle, yeah. That we have the security approval immediately, because I didn't understand that, and that was the reason why I went into the details. Of course, I understand it more because, of course, also their testing approaches evolve by time, because they know more and more bugs, and also the yeah, software is developing. We cannot put a hold button here, but we can do a lot of things. Yeah, or so in our side, and maybe also one answer to a question which I got last time, which that was like, is security testing only something for enterprises, or do I also need to do that on a startup? And security testing. This was a very good question. I really enjoyed that one because before I worked for RBI, I also worked in only for startups, and the answer is you have another risk. Yeah, so maybe your startup company is not that attractive than an enterprise bank, um, so you will get less attacks, but maybe your startup will get bigger and bigger. So I mean that's what we already aim for, and so your risk gets higher, and most probably you get attacked. And also, if you're a small startup and someone is interested, yeah, then you had a bad day. So security is for everyone. And also, to be honest, if you're a startup, you have less applications where you have to test against compared to an enterprise, yeah, because they have tons of applications, and of course their effort which is going into security is much higher than if you have, I don't know, I don't have any example of a startup company.
No, I know what you mean. It's directly analogous to the number of customers and the amount of money you have coming in. But
Yes.
I actually liked your answer on that, because usually when I try to suggest security testing, whether we do it ourselves or whether maybe we don't have the the resources or the budget to do it ourselves and we have to outsource it. Um, Usually when I'm selling that idea, I like to ask, that's the question we get is, well, why do we need to do that? Well, can we get hacked? Number one, the answer is always yes. Number two, do you care about your data getting out? And the answer is always yes, or your customers' data even more, especially if you're in a regulated industry like healthcare and you're subject to even further punishments if that gets out. So that's to put it simply, the question and answer is, can you get hacked? And the answer is always yes. So therefore you should test for security, whether you have one user or 8 million, doesn't matter.
Yes, that's true. I mean, and that's a very important point that you mentioned. Yeah, you always can get hacked. Yeah, I mean, Meta is for sure investing millions of euros or dollars into security testing, but still some from time to time, people can exploit some data from them. Yeah, and I'm quite sure they're also quite struggling because if you're in their data, yeah, is very sensitive. It's customer rated data, and yeah, their bad reputation on the market. If you check over the stocks, if they get hacked, it drops per 30% or something like this. So the damage is tremendously high, and you want to get known if you get hacked. That's also very important that you check your production environments. Of course, if you check Meta, they have millions of production environments, yeah, in their clouds, clustered everywhere. But still, um, you need to check it, yeah, and you need to see what's ongoing, and that the yeah worst case you will terminate the one or the other session. Better to terminate one session than having one session too much often. Yeah. The worst case is as a user you would have to do the login again, yeah, or write a support email address maybe. But better than having losing, I don't know, 3 million entries of customers data. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's a battle of competing priorities, and once you illustrate to whoever the stakeholders are, usually the business, that's the trade-off. It makes it pretty easy to sell more testing and more security awareness, and getting more budget for that. So yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yes. And we all want to go for the or we all aim the same goal that we want to release several times a day. If you check on Amazon side, they do this, yeah, 100 times a day or something like this. And it's important to do that without having continuous security testing. Yeah. Because at some point in time, also an employee or a developer is funny and
Yeah,
deploying a crazy feature which is bypassing the login or whatever. I mean,
right.
that's not possible there. So
Which
there
I
needs
have
to be
seen,
this safety net.
a lot of times. A lot of those hooks are built for people like myself and you who are testing, and then they get forgotten to be removed when we go to production. And now all of a sudden you have a back door that gives you complete wide open access to everything if you know how to get to it. And that's why a lot of vulnerabilities are from people scanning endpoints, right? And that's where you get to where you spoke about people looking for different versions. A lot of times that info endpoint gets left open, and you can see what's deployed, what the version of software is, what the versions of libraries are. If you're publishing that info and you don't turn it off, it's freely available. So, and again, though, going back to my point about dev hooks and test hooks, if you're not paying attention to that and disabling that or making it launch dark, that's a huge thing that I've actually seen that go in production before, and we luckily realized it that day and turned it right off with a flag. But luckily, that's another design paradigm. We had feature flags so that we could do that. So that's another part of you get into modern development, and launching dark and doing blue green deploys. It all ties in. I think that ties into security as well, because it protects you in times that something does go wrong. If you're getting a security attack and it's related to a certain feature, you can just go flip a Boolean flag in the database and it's off, and your access is off. So those type of things, obviously it's a different conversation for a different day, but I think it ties into some of what you're talking about here with people like yourself doing this type of testing can help correct and find these things before they ever occur. That's the thing. If you can find these, but that kind of goes to a point that somebody asked in the chat earlier about, does shift left only make sense for UI and API testing? Shift left is just a cool thing that sounds cool. It's really about testing all the time and knowing what to test when. I think that every type of test should be run on a regular cadence, and depending on your app, how much and how often is up to you. But I think security, you shouldn't save it to the end. A lot of times companies save security and load testing and performance testing until the very end of the process. Well, a lot of times it's too late. You can't fix it. You're shipping in a week. What are you going to do when you find a vulnerability at that point in security or in performance or both? Usually it's, well, we'll do a little thing, but it doesn't fix the thing, right? That's
Or
why you're
you
smiling.
or you don't ship it at all. And you will do it in the next sprint.
But that usually doesn't happen. Usually the cat's out of the bag. Marketing is on board. Everybody's ready to go, and it goes. And then you have to
Yeah,
deal with some fallout, right?
that's true. Yeah. I mean, it's very important. Maybe that also I can share because, as I mentioned before, security was something. Yeah, not tangible really. And now I have much more insights. I'm still not a security expert. Please don't expect that from me, but my awareness really increased about the risk. Yeah, and I also saw how easy it is to exploit system or to check system. Yeah, and also to how easy it is to get first findings about you. So if you go, as I mentioned, for SAST, yeah, and this is already a big achievement, yeah, for you personally. Yeah, that's also kind of shift left because you have now the awareness. Yeah, so you know the risk, and then you maybe or you will definitely think about it if you test the application. And if you don't go for all these techniques, but if you write a test automation code or if you do the manual testing, you will consider it. Yeah, maybe you do an exploratory testing sessions before the release with a security eye. Yeah, so that, hey guys, now we do this session, yeah, we sit together, we test our application before release, and we will try to hack it. Yeah,
Yeah,
also
and being
that's
aware, I think awareness is the key word. It's just being aware. It doesn't mean that you, as the person who thought of it, is the one that has to do it. A lot of times, people will think of great ideas and then they stifle them down because, well, I don't have time, right? Or I don't have budget, or I don't have buy-in. But if you can keep that idea going and bring that to somebody and get awareness to it, and then get buy-in, the rest will take care of itself. Because if you can make a case for this type of scenario before it happens instead of after, it's a lot easier to get the buy-in. Well, sometimes.
absolutely yes. And it helps if you show your product owner how to hack your system, believe me.
Correct. That's what I mean. I talk to my team personally all the time about, sometimes it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission. And a
That's
lot,
true.
because people don't understand the concepts you're trying to sell them. But if you can do a quick POC, even something like that, that's just lightweight, doesn't take you very long, but you put together kind of an end-to-end POC, or proof of concept, and then you show them, it hits them upside the face and they can't deny it anymore. Then they go, oh, wow, this is what you were talking about.
Very good approach. I
Yeah.
like that one.
Yeah, it sounds like you've done that already.
But of course not in production.
Right. Right. That's
You
the
know,
next step. That's
it,
actually a
it
really good point. A lot of people are moving to testing in production as well, and that's a huge thing. I got the benefit of being part of a company where we had testers that did test in production, and they would also help us test before we pushed to production. They were experts on what it should do, right? So they would help us as engineering testers catch some of that stuff that we didn't think of, because they're the people that are using it every day. So I think
mm,
testing in production is a massive opportunity. And a lot of times you just don't have, again, time, budget, resources, or whatever stops you from being able to do it. But I think having that awareness, going back to that word that you used, is key, because at least you can try to move toward it.
absolutely true. Yeah. Really, this is also what I see quite often, that the product owner is aware that he needs to release very fast. Yeah, so we need to ship features at least every 2 weeks, yeah, to our customers because they want it. Yeah, which is good. Yeah, and I want to ship every day if I could afford it. Yeah, but the awareness is not really here. I mean, don't get me wrong, yeah, about the risk. Yeah, if we ship faster and faster and faster, what is the risk related to that? And of course, security is very highly related to the risk. And we should also create this as a test engineer. It's our responsibility to create this awareness for all our, let's call it now, stakeholders. And it's then quite good if you, I don't know, install or use a Overstep dependency check Overstep, sorry, and just show them the report of all findings which we have on our UART environment from our application, just to make a picture. Yeah, it's easy to put them in Excel or whatever technology you have, or and make it a beautiful graph with all the risks, all the findings. Sorry, with all the categories I wanted to say, and this is then visualized and people see it and then okay, maybe we don't want to have any critical finding, and maybe we don't want to have any major findings where we don't have an answer for it. Yeah, so with that all of the team knows the major issues of the application and so on. Yeah,
Yeah, and if you're using, agile, which most shops either are or moving toward, you can make that part of your definition of done, right? You're not done a release, or you're not done a story until it passes XYZ test. It's just another test. It's another type of test. That's all it is, right? It's just a different way to check that we've got things covered. The functionality usually gets tested very thoroughly. but the edge cases, the negative cases, the security, the pen testing, the performance and load testing, that stuff either doesn't get touched as much or not at all. So I think bringing awareness, again, you use that word and I know I'm pounding on it, but I think that's the big thing, is making people aware of the impact. If we don't do it, this is what happens. Everybody can tell the story of what happens once it happens, but telling people and warning before it happens is the key. And that's where you get some credibility, and you can get more and more buy-in for things that you want to do in the future and do more cool stuff. So I think that was all the questions we had. I think that I haven't seen any more come in since we've been chatting. Did you have anything else you wanted to cover?
Not really. Yeah. If my contribution to the community is now that they are aware, yeah, of security and the risks, security testing and the risks, and I showed them maybe my approach, yeah, or our approach, how we deal with it. Please, that's not a silver bullet and not a blueprint, yeah. That's already great, yeah. So if I create that awareness, and if I maybe one or the other motivated to go into more details, also please, yeah, you can connect to me and we can have also chat afterwards, yeah, if you want to discuss the one or the other thing. I'm always open for
Yeah,
that.
definitely. ZappleTech did a good job of sharing your information and Andrew's information on the event page. So it has your LinkedIn. So anybody that wants to talk to them, feel free to connect. I've already connected to Andrew. I've sent one to you already. I think it's been a great conversation today. Really good topics. It's nice to talk to people that are doing it, not just talking about it, and coming up with real solutions to these problems. So thank you very much for everything today. And I think this was a really good event, and I learned a lot myself too. So what else can you ask?
Awesome. Good. Then
You,
I would say thank you very much. Thank you very much for the very, very nice and kind moderation. And yeah, hopefully see you soon.